Yes, I'm doing well. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Birmingham.
Good afternoon. Anyway, favorite program. I look forward to it every Friday, and I also listen to every programs you guys put out. So I have an idea that I want to post, and then probably that you see if you can, educate us a little bit on this. Yeah. Look, United States of America is a great country. Yeah. I do believe that it should take up its responsibility and sit at a table with the other great powers, the US, the China, and the other countries that represent a large populations in the world. Rather than it's allying this with small countries like the Baltic states. Anyway, I haven't listened to your program. It was just by coincidence that the same question is relating to that. Rather than it's allying with smaller countries like the Baltic states, Taiwan, and a few other countries, yeah. I think that is not doing a good service to mankind. I think the US should take its responsibility and sit at the table and sort out the whole issues that face mankind so that we will all benefit out of whatever result will come out of that. What do you think about my opinion?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think this is exactly what the United States should do. And by the way, just to say, Alex and I have done some programs recently discussing US foreign policy in places like the Pacific. And I've done a recent program in which I've discussed, again, US policies in response to, and this program was provoked by a rather interesting commentary that the Chinese government has issued through its, semi-official newspaper Global Times. And of course, we've heard talk about the United States wanting to de-escalate the situation with Russia and wanting a summit meeting with Putin in June. By the way, the latest indications are that the Russians are now cooling to that idea and that they're saying to themselves that there's really no point because the United States is not prepared to deal with us. But Birmingham, you're absolutely right. That is what the United States would do. Absolutely, the United States should have its red lines. It should have its red lines on trade. It should have its red lines on economic transfers and technology transfers and copyrights and things of that kind. It should also have its geopolitical red lines too. But it's got to recognize that other countries have them also. It can't go on pushing against other countries all the time, especially great powers like China and Russia, and not expect that that will provoke a reaction. And given that it doesn't have the power anymore to dictate to these great powers in the way that it briefly did in the 1990s, it has no rational alternative other than to sit down and talk to them. But that is something that I'm afraid the neocon faction in Washington finds extraordinarily difficult to accept. In fact, not just difficult, I don't think they ever will, because it is so far beyond their own political imagination. And it goes so much against the whole raison d'etre that they will never do it.
Which if it will do that, there is an additional benefit for the US population as well as everybody else on the globe.
Absolutely. One of the most interesting things about this Chinese editorial, which I mean, you mustn't take this entirely seriously, but it seemed to accept that for the time being, if the United States did that, it would remain the greatest, most powerful country, because even if China overtakes it in its aggregate economic power, the United States will still be much more advanced technologically. It will still be individually, Americans will be very much richer. It will still be at the center of its alliance system. So it has strategic space to make these kind of decisions. But at the moment, it's finding it very difficult to do that. And again, that very same Chinese editorial made the point that there is complete discordance and uncertainty about what the government in Washington really wants and what it wants to do, because they've sensed, and this is again something we've discussed many times on the Duran, Alex and I, that there is no actually strong, purposeful government in Washington able to make decisions, able to make practical and realistic decisions in the interests of the United States, in the interests of the American people, in the interests, by the way, of the West as a whole. It's not got that kind of government. And in that drift that arises from it, well, all sorts of bad things happen. And I'm afraid that's the reality. So, yes, I agree. That is what the United States should do. It's got the means to go up against the Chinese and the Russians and negotiate toughly and successfully and strike a good bargain with them. But will it? Is it able to do that? Many people in the United States think as you do. Unfortunately, if you look at Washington and the political class there and the government, very few people there seem to do, and those that do are isolated.
Yeah. My last question, Mr. Alexander, do you see anybody on the horizon that will drag the U.S. out of its whatever situation it is now? Do you see any politician, anybody in the horizon, maybe not immediately, but down the road, that will pull U.S. out of where it is?
Well, I mean, there's always Donald Trump, I suppose. I mean, bear in mind that I mean, he did try to do some of the things you've discussed. I mean, maybe he didn't do it very coherently. You can criticize his application, but he did show some understanding of these things, and he is saying, you know, hinting that he's going to be back in 2024. Other than him, I'll be straightforward about it. I don't see anyone. That's the real problem. I don't see anybody coming out of the political class in Washington who has that kind of realism and that practical, tough-minded capacity to see the world as it really is. And that's the truth. And I'm very much afraid that if anybody like that were to emerge and were to win the White House, which would be very difficult, that person would find themselves facing all the same problems that Donald Trump did, and perhaps finding it even more difficult than Trump did to withstand those sort of pressures, because that is the reality of where the problems in the United States are.
That's true. Trump was an opportunity, but I think they hated him from head to toe.
Absolutely, they did.
Why?
But partly because, as I said, in his own idiosyncratic way, I think he was edging towards the views that you have. I mean, he is a sort of complicated figure in himself. He would say some things sometimes, other things other times. But remember, he was able to sit down with Kim Jong-un. No other American leader has done that. No other American leader seems to be interested in doing it. He was able to do that. He wanted to talk to Putin. He actually personally got on well with Xi Jinping. He was prepared to do those things. And of course, that was the reason, first and foremost, why they hated him. That's why someone like Liz Cheney opposed him. And by the way, it's interesting to see that she's probably on her way out. Well, we shall know, it seems, fairly soon.
Nice weekend, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Romeo. Take care.